Welcome everyone to the final session for this programming week. We've saved the best for the last. It's been an incredible week, and I just want to say thank you to each one of you for being here, and not just being here, for being so present, and for really engaging and for sharing and hanging out in the evenings on the square. I think we might have a final rendezvous tonight, so everyone's invited. We're really pleased to present this panel because I think it's been, the stars have aligned, so to speak, to have Amak and Madiha here. Madiha joins us here for the incubator program, which we concluded a couple of days ago, and I must say, when we received her application, we were in a real dilemma to figure out whether she should be a participant or one of the mentors. And so, we met in Kathmandu actually some years ago, and really wanted to find a way to engage more, because as we found out, there is no longer a direct flight from Karachi to Kathmandu, and so it requires one to fly via Doha or Bangkok, it seems, despite us being so close by. And so it's really wonderful to have you here, Madiha. Madiha's practice involves photography and film. She teaches, and she's got an incredibly vast sort of repertoire. And today she will sort of share a breadth of that with us. Amak, it's so wonderful to have you here. Also, the stars aligned to have you come. We were offered very last minute, I have to share the story, a flight by Cathay Pacific that flies via Hong Kong. And so we really put on our thinking caps, and then Anshika very kindly, and Amak's work is part of the show that Anshika has curated here, Who's and Home, which is showing in Chassel at the moment. If you haven't visited, please do. So we offered Amak this invitation, and then she took it up like this, only to realize that she needed a transit visa in Hong Kong, which she didn't have time to apply for. But then she persisted, and we were really heartened until the last day. You were like, hanging on to, and then you got here. So it's really amazing. Amak is based in the UK currently and is also teaching, and so it's really lovely to have both of you here today. So thank you for preparing. They asked me very last minute to do this little bit of moderating. I really don't think that it's quite necessary. So I think we'll keep it quite simple, as in I'll ask each of you to present work, and then we'll have a little chat afterwards. And then, of course, hopefully talk to everyone in the room as well. So I think Madiha will be going first.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Nantara. It's really lovely to be in Kathmandu. As you just mentioned, it's quite a trek to come from Karachi, but it's worth it. The incubator program is really interesting. I'm just fascinated by your festival and how you managed to pull it off. It's great to actually present with Amak, because many years ago I'd seen her work at FOAM, the Photography Museum in Amsterdam, and then later on in the publication. It's just interesting, like how you would see someone's work just recently and then you'd actually get to present. I am intending to show some of my recent work. Largely, my practice is concerned with users, film and photography, and some of the film works are longer, so it's not always possible to share it. Largely, I look at sound, moving image, film and fiction. And I'm interested in how pleasure and entertainment are experienced in public spaces. For instance, my interest has varied from photographing smaller devotional towns to public libraries and reading rooms, studying spaces that have become peripheral to urban life, but by tenacity and chance continue to survive. Most of my projects are long-term, often spanning 3 to 4 years, but given the parameters of this talk, I'm also starting with something that I did, as a short-term project. This project was largely developed around an international artist residency that I did in India, in Rajasthan, and I developed two small projects around that. One was called Vagar Jukebox and the other was called Viras. So Vagar Jukebox largely stemmed from studying and recording orality of singing matrimonial or obituary songs. When I sort of arrived in Rajasthan, I came with this expectation that it had a significant musical tradition. To my surprise, that wasn't so, and a lot of people were playing recorded electronic music on hired DJ cards for weddings and other such events. So even in a small town like Partapur, Bollywood songs and a lot of those kind of contemporary music was what I saw on the streets. So I kind of just went around and around the neighborhoods and came across several women in Partapur who collectively then started remembering some of these songs which I started recording. And during our recording sessions, they also forgot a lot of stuff, but by sort of letting them revisit these, I felt like even those missing pieces in the songs were interesting. So then I kind of developed this digital jukebox, which was sort of, I used that currency of a jukebox to think of sound as a way of historicizing nostalgia, and which we often kind of discard, or I at least was discarding in the guise of sentimentality. So through this project, I also tried to understand Partapur, and so many questions developed around love, domestic relationships, patriarchy, because often they're sung in first-person female voice. So this was placed in a defunct bus stop next to the main bus stop, and so people were able to listen to these songs, interact with it, and this project was there over a period of time. So the women who I was also recording, they also came to listen, and I also kind of translated, some of these songs, transcribed some of these songs and made the text available. The other project that I worked on in conjunction with it was also made around the same time. And I came across these two individuals who knew this song that they themselves also didn't understand. Neither did the other people. So I kind of, and this is called Viras, and it was sung in praise of Rajput kings. So I thought that this was interesting, that I was sort of looking at, I thought I was doing something interesting where I was constantly recording and making it available. But this was already being sung, but no one understood it. So the futility of singing a song and the obsoleteness of it was of interest to me. So in between the singing of that song, which the song spans over 2 hours, they would lose interest also themselves. And they would then ask for water, or they would just forget the singing. So all of that then kind of became part of the work. I just thought that it's interesting that within, this orality and entertainment comes futility and burden as elements into the work. So largely I've also been interested in like small towns and which are at the cusp of this sort of rural-urban situation. And so I started also kind of making work which looks at basically this work is made in Sevan in Pakistan. It's very famous devotional town. I'm guessing everyone's heard of the song Damadam Mast Kalandar, and this is the Saint Kalandar. Kalandar is the name of the saint. So then I was kind of just interested in pleasure, futility, small towns at the cusp of urbanization, and also specifically in terms of devotional towns, this aspect of commodification of religion. So these are the photographs that I started making a couple of years ago, and I'm still working on this project. I thought I'll share. So this project kind of led to another project, which is a feature-length film that I'm working with another co-director, and it's called. It largely looks at nomadic performers and small-town entertainment venues. It's a longer trailer, so I'll just show maybe a minute or two from it.
When the water left the river, it did not come back. آب رفته دیگه بر نمیگرده. Never will return again.
So the project that I'm currently working on since past 1 year or so is called These Silences Are All the Words. It's centered around public libraries in Karachi. It's a much quieter work, and it started with my own interest in the literary works in Urdu language and other languages such as Sindhi and Balochi in Karachi. Growing up, I just felt that the language of navigating art and ambition was English, and I wanted to reconnect with other languages. So it was with this background that I started going to the libraries, and some spaces were barely active with very few visitors, I discovered, and some libraries were a skeleton of what they were. Some remained fully stocked but covered in dust and grime, and sort of again brought a sense of futility of access. But when these spaces would get visitors, they would suddenly come alive and offer a glimpse into a city sharply, I felt, was divided into these different, and specifically the linguistic divide between Urdu and English. So the first iteration of the work was shown at the Karachi Biennale last year at a place called Theosophical Society, which is now known as Jamshed Memorial School. So the Theosophical Society library barely remains, it's defunct. And as a result, there were many shelves which were empty. So I projected a video piece and installed backlit film in the empty shelves of the library as a way to, as a small way to register my own protest. And also to activate the space in some way. So that's how the photographs worked, and just earlier showed the image of the film. So at this stage, I had just begun working on the project. It was just around a 5-minute film and some photographs. But later on, as I started going to this particular space, I also started filming this library. a long history with this library. It was a significant library. There was a memorial hall where certain plays would take place, and theosophy was studied and presented. But the president of the society went missing and was assassinated, and so the authorities or the state just felt that it's best that the library shouldn't function. So instead, all this history of the library and what it was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, including any Parsons connection with the space, who was a significant person in the freedom movement, both in India and Pakistan, one doesn't really know about, neither do the students who go to this school. I kept working on the project, and then I've been able to show it more recently as well, where I just kind of then started making photographs of the librarians. Also, these sort of moments of reflections in the changing landscape around the libraries, such as, for instance, at one of the libraries there was a temple, and then the temple was converted into a library post-partition. So when you look through the windows, you see a mosque right in front. So there, combined with these reflective moments with the librarians, I also started photographing what the spaces had become now, and what that told us about the city. So this show was installed at Tetley, a gallery in the UK, and Tetley was a brewery once, and owned by several people from the East India Company. So in a way, it's a couple of things that I was thinking about with in terms of colonization and language. I felt that it was an interesting space to show work. B, I felt that it kind of just offered these spaces, these empty offices, where I was able to kind of again use sort of this backlit language that I was looking at already and expand on it further. So the portraits of the librarians were also kind of installed again as backlit images, which I just started making earlier this year. And the video was shown as projections, just to give a sense of the space. And some of the shorter vignettes, video vignettes, which I was also developing around some of these libraries and these stories, were kind of, were presented in this manner. We've seen this work, so the third iteration of the work was sort of presented at the Liverpool Biennale a couple of months ago. And by this time I'd started making portraits of the librarians. This was in the summer of this year. So I just felt that librarians in some ways were also, often these libraries are not digitized, so the first point of contact are the librarians. And I just felt that they were sort of this aging intelligentsia, and they kind of lived in a certain time. So I just started photographing them, and I recorded several conversations between the librarians and the library users on the fly, and so that has now become part of the work. I'm just going to share some portraits. And some of the films are also shown elsewhere around the city, such as the Playhouse, and also at this gallery called the Open Air. So this is how the portraits were sort of presented along with the images. So I'll just end with one short vignette.
अरे अल्लाह, ये हाथी का हाथी कुत्ता कहाँ गया है? चौकीदारी के लिए? किसकी? घर की? इस घर की? हाँ, बहुत होशियार कुत्ता है। घर में कुछ ना हो तब भी इसकी चौकीदारी कर सकता है। इस अज़बाजी मुकालमे से बाद में ये फायदा जरूर हुआ कि तनख्वाह मिलते ही हमने घर गृहस्थी का जरूरी सामान खरीदा था ताकि कुत्ता उसकी चौकीदारी कर सके। लेकिन वालिदैन की समझ में आने वाला जो फौरी फायदा हमने सरेदस्त बयान किया वो कुछ ऐसा था कि जिससे अपने बच्चों को जानबूझकर महरूम रखने के लिए पत्थर का कलेजा चाहिए, और वो फायदा ये था कि आखिर कोई एक अंग्रेज का कुत्ता। और ये कौन नहीं जानता कि हमारे यहाँ अनपढ़ से अनपढ़ आदमी भी अपने कुत्ते का नाम अंग्रेजी में रखता है और अंग्रेजी में उससे बातचीत और डांट डपट किया करता है। चुनांचे हमने इशारतन तवज्जो दिलाई इसकी वजह से बच्चों को अंग्रेजी बोलना आ जाए। ये सुनते ही हमारी बेगम ने कुत्ते के सर पर प्यार से हाथ फेरा और जंजीर ऐसे फैसला पूरी झटके से हमारे हाथ से छीन ली जैसे लेडी मैकबेथ ने मैकबेथ के हाथ से फर्नीचर छीना। इस ड्रॉप सीन से कोई 20 बरस गुजर जब आतिश जवान बल्कि नौजवान था, उसने नीली आंखों, भरी भरी टांगों और ब्लॉन्ड बाल वाली मेम को बाद में अपने जेबी साइज के पोमेरेनियन कुत्ते को बीच खींचकर प्यार करते देखा। भाभी साले इसी काबिल गोल छपरा सफेद गाला से बालों से सारा जिस्म इस पूरी तरह ढका हुआ था कि जब तक चलना न शुरू करे ये मालूम करना मुश्किल होता था कि मुंह किस तरफ।
So that's pretty much about it. We were playing this on 2 computers, so sorry about thank you so much, Amak, that I put into give you more work. So largely they're very quiet spaces, but then sometimes someone reads something over there. So it was interesting for me to look at, these spaces which are largely they're not activated, and then someone comes and reads and then brings a poet would come or a writer would come. So in this case someone had dropped by and was reading something, and I just felt like it in the quietness of the library just kind of created this moment that everyone around found very entertaining. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Hi everyone, it's wonderful to see you all and it's amazing to be here. Thank you so much Nayantara and Anshika and also Thomas who is not here. It couldn't happen without your help, guys. I'm sorry about all those silly stories. Today I will talk about 2 different projects. The one which right now I'm working and try to make a sense of that. So hopefully first we can go through that and then I explain Shanasname, the project which is on display and at the exhibition, part of the group exhibition which was curated by Anshika. But first I like to start to share with you how photography became beyond anything and everything else in my life. For me it is really personal because I was born in Shiraz, Iran, after the revolution which happened in 1979 and it was established in 1980. So the revolution happened in my country but within so many people and within so many families' life, including mine. And this photograph, which is the photograph of my lovely father for 2 years. It was my father for me, to me. I had conversation with this photograph, and I was quite young. I used to carry it, take it to bed, because it was the evidence of his being. After revolution, he was in prison, and then he had to leave us and go to live in Paris. So that was the time I learned I can have this connection with the photographs. It's really interesting, the things which happens in life. I was talking to Catherine, actually, today, on the same day, 12 years ago, I lost my father. And it was the same time when they called me. I was in UK. And now I guess, I'm sure he's with us now. And that's the reason he's one of these photographs. And that is the value of the photographs, the evidence of the presence, and how people can be absent, but at the same time present. So this connection with the photographs, in fact, it grows with me. And we've been together, these connections, these photographs, and it wasn't just about my father. It was many of my families. As Lawrence explained, so many families, they left Iran. So I had this, I started to create my memories out of my family albums, and I was introduced to my family through their photographs. And later on, when I was 18 years old, I started to study photography in Art University in Tehran. Because of the interest which I had, and because of the attraction of this archival material, I started to do my research on archival materials which belong to 1844, when photography came to Iran. And for the very first time, one of the Iranian people of the palace became the subject for the photographer. And the main photographer in 1844 was the King of Iran, who you can see him in the middle of the photograph with his wife. And I found it out he had 117 wives, and they were in this palace. He was a lucky dude. And he used to photograph these women himself, because it was a taboo, because of the religious issues, to be photographed by anyone else for these women. So he has started to take these photographs, and he was really interested in art, fascinated by art. And through these 2 years, I was quite lucky, because I found it that through the vision, I cannot find everything about these women and these lives, because their lives were really different, and their stories, they are absolutely different from the story which I used to read in the history at the school. They were not these exotic women of royal family. In fact, they had a really difficult life in the palace. You can imagine 17 wives live together. I guess it won't be really fun. So they had so many issues, and I found the handwriting of the king's daughter, who was one of the first activists in her era. And I found it out how she described the life of Iranian women in this palace as black and white. Black, which was the life which they had, and the white one, which was their life as royal people. And it was this contrast between their lives in public and in private. And at the same time, after the revolution, I was always experiencing the same feeling. Which one is really me? Am I in public or in private? Because in public, you have to go through the standards of presentation, and you have to follow them to be accepted. But at the same time, in private, you can mostly be yourself. But through the time and seeing yourself in the mirror every day, to get to school, to get to work, and wearing this scarf or getting ready, it's just like reminding oneself about the religion, about the standards of being. And it's become and in fact, it became part of me. So I had this doubt, which one is a life which I prefer to have? And in the private life, obviously, we had crazy parties, we had the life which we wanted to have. So I just decided to combine the story of these women, Qajar women, which belong to 100 years ago, with my contemporary stories. And in my practice, I use these historical photograph because they always have unlimited things to say to me. And I always listen to them and learn a lot about archival materials. And for this project, what I've done, I rephotographed these archival materials, and I concealed the face of contemporary women behind the mask of the past. And I started with the people who I knew, my family obviously, my father, my mother, and it was easier for me and it was more comfortable because I knew the subjects and they started to know these photographs. But another reason was it was really hard to get the permission in Iran to work on this subject, women and hidden face of women. And the fact in these photographs, the mask covering the face, but still that subject is present. And it is, these masks, they are mythified. Actually, they are metaphoric representation of being absent and present at the same time. But after one year, obviously, of working this on this project in private place at home, I started to think about a way to take this subject out in public places. And obviously, I didn't get the permission because I was really honest, and then I showed them and I told them what I want to do, but then I did learn. Sometimes it's good to lie. So I went to the same people and I told them, I am really fascinated how the city had been changed, and I want to capture and I want to photograph all the trees in Tehran. And they gave me my permission in 10 minutes. So I started to ask my subjects. So in my photographs, you see so many trees for the beginning, because I asked the women to sit, can you please sit next to this tree? And then I used to take the photographs. But after 6 months, I took it in different places. And what I wanted to show this censorship and this covering and hiding your face and concealing your identity. It is not part of these people's being. So they are going through even the self-censorship. Because whenever they realized I was photographing, they used to, all these women, they covered their faces with the flowers or with the hand, and it happened many times. So that was the project which I worked on 15 years ago, and it was finished. And it was the metaphoric representation and political representation for me those days of these women and their lives. But then a few months ago, I had this offer from the publisher. They want to publish the book. Actually, this project, it is going to be a book in April 2019. And after 10 years, I started to edit these photographs. And I realized I am not editing these pictures. I started to edit my memories, my life. And this edit, it became a narrative of my life. Because now I have this hope of return. I have the sorrow of separation. I haven't been home for 11 years almost. And I haven't seen my mom, my mother, or my father for 12 years and 5 years. So it was really interesting to see how those days, which was my present, now it's in a very far past time of my life. And how these people who they were carrying those masks one day, they are turning to the mask, and they are the pictures of the past. So the edit of the work had been changed, and it shows that anybody could carry the mask, and these masks could be carried by anybody, and anyone could become a mask and a memory. And because when I work on the project, they are deeply personal, but at the same time, they somehow pertain to some general issues which we share. And it doesn't matter if I am Persian or Indian or from Pakistan, there are some feelings which we absolutely share together. And I work on these projects which is personal and common at the same time, and at the same time it's a narrative of my own life. So they have chapters, and each chapter is a chapter of life. So these projects, it became abstract because I am looking to find myself and to create my life out of these photographs in UK and these memories especially around my family, because they were my kingdom those days, and now I lost them. So I just try to find them. And also the abstract look of the tattoos which my father had on his body, and those days, because he had them done in Paris, and I was absolutely embarrassed about them, because those days in Iran it was a taboo, and not any of my friends' father had tattoos. And I was always questioning why he's doing these things. And he was carrying all these stories, because he was a very, very lovely man, and he is, and he was a poet. So he was carrying these stories which he had, and now I try to metaphorically use the things which he had on his body, and he was covering himself with those stories to carry on, because he went through a really difficult time in his life. So this is the first project, and the next one which I like to share with you is Shanasname, which I can show you the multimedia of the show. Unfortunately, I couldn't show it at the exhibition, but the exhibition had been brilliantly curated, and you can see the book there, and also the photographs, but the multimedia is another approach, and I will explain the multimedia on. This is not my favorite part of presentation ever, because I hate to listen to my voice, and for some reason, I don't know why, I decided to use my own voice when I was working on this multimedia. Anyway, and the picture which you see on the left-hand side is the dummy of the book, which I made, and you can please come and see the dummy. And the other one is the book, which was published in 2016 in Bristol by RRB and IC Visual Lab. It was co-published. And here is the multimedia.
I was born in 1980 in Iran. I learned how to wear my scarf when I was 7 years old. Shanasname is the name of official Iranian birth certificate. It contains basic personal details and a photograph of the person it identifies. Shanasname is valid for life, but the photograph must be updated. For a woman in Iran, the making of this photograph is a personally charged affair. Her hair must be covered in keeping with official standards. If the woman's appearance is not correct, the photograph will not be accepted. Years ago, I was sitting in a reception room next to my mother. We were holding our Shanasname. My eyes began to flick from the picture of my mother to the picture of myself and back again, to what these pictures meant, to what they showed and to what they didn't show. I looked like her and she looked like me. And it went beyond that. All of a sudden, I realized that we, all Iranian women, were being made to look the same, plain faces with no hair showing. fingerprints. They were very different. A small part of our being could show how different we were from each other. The scar I had on my finger became a part of my identity, highlighted and noted on the page next to my photograph. Sarah, Shaheen, Azita, Rosa, Ayusha Kubar, Setare, Nona, Iransi, Shahzare, Ziba, Shashiri, Nedasim, Shima, Nahme, Mahsa, Mehmet, Sogon, Ferashtet, Dariush. You will find my letter in your heart. Sadeghi, has many pages. Jamile, Goliberi, Aleisha, Hezekame, Nona, Sharare, Shadi, Golshadi, Leila, Sara, Henga, Shahi, Azita, Sharoza, Nilisa, Bahar, Iran, Sadeghi, Mahin, Jamile, Goliberi, Leila, Hengame, Mehregan, Farid. You will find my letter in your heart. It has many pages full of silence. I saw her at the ceremony. She was kind and happy. I took her portrait and her fingerprint with me. 1 year later, she wrote to me and asked me to remove her photograph from this book. Her name was Shirin. That was Shanasname, and now I am happy to explain it. The main reason of Shanasname, as I told you, I am always interested in the identity and who we are. Obviously, identity is something which I cannot explain, and it is complex, and it has been so many different perspectives and different meanings inside that. But what I was interested in specifically, it was public and private identity. But then when I moved to UK, I found that I have the third identity which I need to prove it too, and that was my identity as a Persian woman. I'm not talking about the state of identity, the name and surname and your fingerprint, but I was interested about why our fingerprints are unique. And that is part of the identity. Even coming here, they asked me for my fingerprints at the airport. But why nobody used them? Because the representation can be changed. If they use the face, the politic, the culture, religion, the politics of representation can show that. But nobody can show the change the fingerprint. And that is part of us. That is part of our being. And I just try to invite the viewers of this project to come closer and look at these people, and there are many of these women, or even male and female, which have been questioned, and their identity have been questioned because of the government. But the fact of their life and the truth of their life is absolutely different. But as we know, and as Freud said, the truth is not out of the power. I understand it. But then maybe we can start to know them and see them with different eyes, maybe. So now, if Nayantara, you would like to join us, we can just explain the board. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you both. That was really wonderful. We were having a little chat yesterday. Is it okay that I sit here? We were having a little chat yesterday in the cafe. I think what struck me a little bit was this sense of how both as sort of women artists, there is this pressure, and what I find really striking with your work, Madiha, I'm sure there is much more to your work than what you were able to share with us today in this short span. But, this sort of pressure to sort of represent an identity of being a woman artist, etc. And here today you're talking about, so many things that impact you that are not necessarily related to gender, and obviously as women and as women artists, we are concerned about the rest of the, other parts of society as well, etc. So I was just wondering how much of that pressure you feel, in terms of representing specific identities, and how you navigate that with your work. So it's for both of you, actually.
I personally don't feel that pressure specifically as a woman photographer and artist. I just think that photography inherently is complex enough medium to carry this burden of representation that in itself it would always carry. Just to answer very quickly, I would just say that I don't feel that pressure of representation. I just try to be and try to photograph what I see, wherever I'm able to, what interests me. It's not always easy to photograph on the street, but that's not the kind of work currently I'm making anyway. So I haven't felt restricted in any way, or I just don't. In fact, I think I usually work without a crew on my own, or sometimes with another co-director, a friend of mine, who we both of us have worked together, and have developed a sensibility and navigation skills to kind of keep it small, keep it low-key, to kind of get that access and to be able to work quickly. So that's what I would say.
For me, I guess, when I work on a project, I can say I don't know how to relate myself to the context because sometimes it is absolutely different. It depends on the situation, or it depends even with people who I used to work with. Unfortunately, maybe that's the reason I am still working with the photographs which I took 15 years ago, because I found it is really difficult for me to start again to photograph my personal stories in UK, back in UK. So that's how I feel I should be related to those people, and I should feel them, because as I told you, I am interested. I take the voice of people around me and I give them a voice. That is the process which I work with women, or right now I work with my family photographs. And what is interesting for me, it's about finding this pressure, the pressure which I had as an artist, which I cannot say as a woman artist. I cannot call myself like that, to be honest. It could happen to any artist. It's these double battles which we hand in, for me, with my culture and my history, in two different grounds. Because we are fighting two battles. One is with our regime back in Iran, and another one with Westerners, to just prove ourselves outside of Iran or to other people, because what they know is through the media. So that was the time when I found myself, how can I somehow cover these two issues together? How can I talk to people in Iran and also talk to people out of Iran? And what I was interested in is about, sometimes when you talk about women in a country or about their issues, you learn a lot about that culture, about their standards, about their government, about their politicians. So that is my feeling about this work, and that is how I feel the pressure of responsibility.
wonder if I could ask each of you to maybe, if you had a question for each other, or a response to just seeing the work now.
It was really interesting because we had a chat the other day and we were thinking about these doubles and something which exists but it's started to become invisible, and I was talking about this language which is become invisible in your country, but still it is there. And I was interested why people, they started to, they decided not to use that. It is because they want to show they are privileged to know another language, or is it because it's a standard of being? For example, if they want to find a job, is it possible to find it when you talk fluently Urdu, or you have to talk in English too? Is it kind of presenting and representing yourself and your identity, or is it something which is a choice?
I don't think the language is invisible. It's fairly prevalent. But there is an ambition associated with English because it's a language of authority. So in some ways, if you want to do well, if you want to be at a certain position, then you would speak in that language, or you'd be fluent in that language. Also, it's one of those things that, it's not just in Pakistan, in the Indian subcontinent. I'm sure people from India or elsewhere would have felt that there is, growing up in that system, which is an English-speaking system. Because again, there is an Urdu medium system, an Hindi medium system, or an English medium system. That in itself creates division within the education system to create, who climbs up the ladder and who doesn't. So in that sense, the language itself is not necessarily under threat or anything. It's just the fact that the literary traditions are not as well known. We were fined in school if we didn't speak in English, because we went to convent schools, or in the middle class families, they were cheaper, accessible, they were set up by the missionaries at the time. So those kind of things, one doesn't know what is being written about art in Urdu, or what was written, and who were the poets who were referring to certain artistic movements. So all the art theory or the photography related work that we read was all in English, Western theory, with very little insight into what were our writers or poets were writing. So I think that's where it kind of, So in that sense, in order to appear or knowledgeable, people would often speak, in that language. I had a question for you about, in the sense, like when you say that you become in some ways the voice of the women, or this aspect of representation that you feel that, by collating hundreds of photographs, how do you feel about, like, what is their interpretation of it, or what has been their interpretation of it, or have they seen the project, or what's been their, how in other words, how can one expand it into a two-way process perhaps? And I think you touched upon it when you were speaking a few days ago, that it's an expansion that you are possibly looking at.
For first part, unfortunately, I couldn't show this book in Iran, so they couldn't see the book and they couldn't see this project. But then I started to be in conversation with them because I have their contacts, obviously, and my mother in Iran, she arranged something so I could have Skype meetings with them. And I think their feedback was and still is really powerful and really amazing for the next project, because obviously the project, it's called multi-interpretation, because it depends where and who look at this book or look at this project. I had so many different feedbacks about this book, about people who describe it as a me as an artist who doesn't want to go to hell or be love, 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 or people who just try to criticize my culture. So, I mean, this multi-interpretation is part of the book, because the fact this book, it is absolutely like the original birth certificate in Iran, as I explained. And even for that original object, there are so many interpretations. So that is the reason I work as a book on this project, and also I use the faces of these women and the fingerprints to give them another voice, but at the same time the individualities which they share on this project. It was something which I guess I found interesting. And they found it quite interesting too, because they were looking at themselves as individuals rather than the pact of this story. So, thank you.
The question when you were our thoughts.
This is just a really quick, simple question for Amak. I've never been to Iran. Do you have to have permission to use a camera out in the city?
It depends. If you want to take photographs of military or mosques or I don't know, parks, public parks, yes, you have to have a permission. But it depends. For example, if you want to go and take a photographs of the petrol station and show, wow, this is brilliant, look at these techniques here, it's comparable to Tokyo. Even they invite you to go and take the photograph. So it depends what do you want to show and how do you want to represent that. And who is it to represent it. So, yeah.
And who gives you permission?
They are, they are different organizations and they work in, there is a collaboration between the university and art and police. So these two, they have this office, which I have no idea what is it, and I just know where it is, I think it was. And you go there and you explain what you want to do, and it might be rejected or it might be accepted. But then there is a way to find a way. For example, for Shanasname, I was working on that for 3 years, and I didn't have permission. I couldn't put any call out to ask people for this for their ID photographs. And as I said, I started with my family, the family of families. But for the fingerprints, I started to contact these people and ask them if I can have the fingerprints. And I traveled like 8 hours driving to go and take the fingerprints, which was amazing because I could meet the person who was photographed to me for many months. But the rejected one, which I have here, I couldn't take it from any place, any public place. Actually, I have a friend who worked in one of these registrar offices, and she found 12 of them through a year and took them out of the bin for me because they were the rejected one, and then she kept it for me. So even though if you are working on archival materials, there are limitations. Or photographing in public, that's the time you need to get permission from that organization.
What is the risk of you don't have permission?
Sorry?
What is the risk?
You will have, I lost 2 cameras, I was arrested, what else? You should pay, and then you will be scared to hell, really scary. Sometimes it depends where they can, because once I was really stupid, I was really young, my brother, he's really funny, and he was 2 years, we were a student, and he's older than me, so it was this protest, green movement in Iran, which happened a few years ago. So they went for the protest, and I said, I will join you. And I was the first year student, so I was quite young. I went, I'm not surprised why, but after 5 minutes they arrested me with my camera. So I lost the camera, my family had to pay some money, but nothing harmful, to be honest. It was just that. Do you want to go to Iran, Jason? I have a very lovely card, by the way, from Jason, so I will not go to jail anymore. It's get out of jail free card, so you can take one yourself too.
Yeah, I printed a lot.
Yeah, cool.
I think lots of us are going to need those cards around here, Jason, so please. And this leads us, I mean, just reminded me of the conversation we were having downstairs yesterday, which is how, I mean, I think in some countries and societies, obviously, these constraints are a lot more, felt. But in many places, there are constraints, and how as practitioners we how we develop methodologies in our work and our practice to work within these constraints. And you were saying how you went off to get permission to photograph trees and then placed all your subjects underneath these trees or around these trees and photographed them, I mean, that's brilliance, right? And
there is always a way around that, I guess. And it makes everything more interesting when you are limited, when you want to hide your camera. I found it it was really like an adventure. And I was thinking, wow, I came back home with 2 more rolls of film. So that was really interesting. And another thing was how people collaborate. And they were listening to me. Can we go there? Of course. Can you please stand here? Because I have some projects which I took a photograph of women's knots of their scarves, and I have 500 photographs. And that was fascinating because we were following each other, just trusting each other, and I always like to have conversation with my subjects, and we will find a way together. And I think that collaboration gives another, kind of voice and beauty and power to the photographs at the end. I don't mean for my photographs, I mean in general. If the work had been limited, I think it will leave a trace on the photograph. So it was interesting.
Questions?
Madiha, sorry, very loud now. I really enjoyed what you showed. I hadn't seen your work before, but I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
So I guess my question would be, where do you draw your sensibilities from, and how do you navigate between the mediums, the film and the still images? Because obviously you've done both, and I really like the films that you did, that you showed me.
It is really, I'm sorry.
Sorry, the question is for Madiha.
Sorry. I wanted to explain her work, so you can explain. No, it's not. I'm totally happy. I was crazy.
So largely, I think a lot of, I didn't go to a film school, so I went to a photography school. But my sensibilities largely are sort of in the Iranian cinema, which we were discussing the other day. And that's where, the quietness of it, the wind will carry us, Abbas Kiarostami's work, the slow burning work that, not everyone necessarily feels as, that it resonates with them. So that's where largely, that's what I look at and listen to. And then also Amar's work, who I was very happy to meet in Kathmandu. This is where it's centered. And then also from reading, a lot of Urdu work in the past few years, Urdu short stories. So it's short story and it's a sort of a dark humor which is part of Urdu literary tradition. Like certain things would be said, but they would be said very politely, but when you listen to them again, there's a scathing remark somewhere in there. So that's also of interest, that how do you say and then insert another layer into the conversation. So yeah.
Now can I add what I wanted to add? Because I was thinking.
Right. So a lot of the film work is, if you may have noticed, are actually still frames. So that's where the film work is kind of taking its reference from. There isn't much movement, so I kind of keep the frame intact and let the movement happen, people entering and leaving the frame, hoping that something would happen within that still frame.
can I add something, Kevin? I'm sorry, I should make. Another thing which it was really interesting, and I really loved about your work, because we were discussing that and I like to share it with you. It is the stillness and movement in Mahila's work. And it's just about those subjects which give it to your work. And at the same time, it's absolutely, because sometimes you work on these subjects and become like a conflict or contrast, very big contrast, a strong one. But with your work, it's absolutely matched with the literature. I mean, the involvement of your people, or the movement, the combination of still photographs, and then the literature and the sound of many beautiful videos which she had, but unfortunately we didn't have a chance to show it here. So yeah, thank you.
Well, I had a question, and I'll take this opportunity to ask it. Both of you teach, and I'm just curious to know how that impacts your practice.
So I teach, I've been teaching photography and writing largely. This semester I'm teaching a class called The City in Images, which is looking at South-South axis between Bombay, Karachi and Dhaka, and how do we look at cities instead of just countries. So we're looking at photographs, films and writing, and also finding a lot of similarities. Also stemming from, again, always looking at looking more inwards, looking at the region to see what practices exist. And so yeah, so I teach that class, and then I teach a class in screenwriting. But largely I've taught classes in photography, short story writing or screenwriting. So that's been my, or documentary actually.
For me, teaching is pretty much learning, because I love my students a lot. I hate paperwork, I hate marking and evaluation and all this stuff. But then at the same time, that learning and that conversation which we have, and at the same time, sometimes when I talk about their works or talk about, because mostly I teach photography in context and the theories of photography, which was related to my own study. But at the same time, that when you talk, you listen to yourself. That is quite strong. And that is really helpful for me through the process of my own practice and making the work. So,
Amak, you said that there was a part of the Shehnazname work that you couldn't show in Iran. And I just wanted to get a sense of, where that line lies in terms of censorship, because I know that a lot of galleries there have to get permission, and people find ways to get those permissions or show certain works, because it seems that there is politically charged work that is shown. So how does one decide what can or cannot be shown? And then maybe Madiha, you could also reflect upon how the atmosphere is in Pakistan with public exhibition.
Unfortunately, not part of Shehnazname. I couldn't show Shehnazname at all. And in fact, nobody in Iran could see the book. And it's because of the subject and because of the time which the book was published, and another thing is because of the political stories which is behind Shehnazname. And at the same time, for me, it's really hard. Mostly we have 3 different galleries in Iran, public galleries and private ones, which is one, and then we have underground and we have undergrounds. So obviously, to find the underground or underground galleries, I could do that, but at the same time, the people who work with me, I knew that they won't get access to see the work. They will not be able to get access, and I made this work just to give a voice to these people and to make them, visible, and also to share it with these women and also share their stories with others. So that was one of the reasons I didn't go for that. And at the same time, I had hope to return home. And I had this feeling that one day I will go home and I will see. So I didn't want to increase all these problems, to be honest, in a way. But you can show your work in underground galleries. If you can find one in Iran, it would be possible. What about Pakistan?
I think there is a lot of self-censorship that exists, but lately galleries, I mean in Pakistan nothing is concrete, everything's sort of arbitrary. So one doesn't know what is acceptable, what isn't. Certain things get by and one is surprised at how did that happen. But in the past, I mean the recent years, galleries have hosted talks and works around, which works rooted in, for instance, queerness, or have had strong gay themes with some element of nudity. They won't advertise it a lot, but it would be let's say either an event, or sometimes that's not even an event on Facebook, but nonetheless the work has been shown. In art schools, etc., which are much more open, a lot of work which has had nudity has been shown. In mainstream galleries, so far, I mean, something that's very explicit in terms of nudity would not be shown, but people have talked about, politics, and for instance, Balochistan, which is this province that's almost like, has had certain rebellious, they've had like an issue with the state. So Balochistan, for example, is a topic that they're really concerned about, that's heavily censored. So anything that's based around, any work that's based around that will have very strong opposition, will not be shown, or galleries would say we don't want to show that. So,
opposition doesn't necessarily directly come from the state, right? Because with Sabine, she was hosting writers that were speaking about the Balochistan political situation. So is it always directly, the censorship, does it come from the state, or are there sort of other actors that create that atmosphere?
Largely from the establishment, which is the military. So someone from the intelligence would just slowly saunter in and would say, "What are you doing? This is my card. We'd like to." So the establishment finds ways in which they can, intrude or try to harass or intimidate. Sometimes, you tell them, like there was a friend of mine was mentioning, who was later on heading the second floor after Sabine's assassination. They were hosting the Queer Film Festival, which is a traveling film festival, and someone from the establishment came and said, "I'd like to see the films that you're showing." So they said that, "Sure, but why do you want to see? There's so many, and how many will you see, and what will you do?" So after those conversations, eventually he relented. He didn't want to see the films, and neither was the festival stopped. But he just wanted to make his presence felt. So those kind of things happen, that we are watching over you. We may not be able to entirely always influence you, but we know what you're doing.
And I guess the strongest is in music too, isn't it? In Pakistan, we have some censorship for music, for example, because we have this, as I said, these different organizations. One is for permission, another one is permission of publication. And all the films, it's just like a filter. They have to go through that, and they can be accepted or rejected. It could be a full movie, film, ready, and never have this chance to be seen. Or it would be music, photographs, photo books, literature. So it's just like a filter. Yeah.
The mainstream film and the cinemas go through censor board, which should be a certification board, but not a censor board. But they just take that liberty to censor, which obviously is ridiculous. But as far as music is concerned, the public concerts don't take place primarily, not as many as they used to be, largely because of there was a law which was about significant number of people gathering in one venue because of security. Then the state said we can't guarantee that this would be safe, and what if something happens. So because of that, but not necessarily because of music.
Great, brilliant. Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, Amak, Madiha. for being here.
Kathmandu, Kathmandu, Kathmandu.